So I want you to imagine yourself in your grave, and the angels, they approach you. They ask you the three all-important questions to see if you pass the test of life. Who is your Lord? What is your religion? And who is your prophet? Imagine you're in that state right now. Will you be able to answer those questions? You need to live by these answers so you can answer them in your grave. But a person can't live by something that he or she does not know. So you have to learn these things. For that reason, we have a Islamic studies program, and we'd like to invite you to take a look at the program by joining our Telegram group at the link below. And if you like it, inshallah ta'ala, and you think this is something that could be suitable for you and you may be able to learn your deen here, then you can register for the first year of our program, and hopefully we see you on the other side. Assalamu alaikum. And by the way, people say that this term Salafiyyah was introduced by Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. They say it's something that came about 300 years ago. And some people, they say they're a bit better than that group who says it came across 300 years ago. They say it came across at the time of Ibn Taymiyyah. Both groups are wrong, and I'm going to prove it to you now, inshallah ta'ala. I'm going to show you that the term Salaf was used at the time of the Salaf themselves. And then I'm going to show you it was used at the time of Ibn Taymiyyah as well. So definitely the ones who say that this came around 300 years ago are going to be refuted. And those who say it came across 700 years ago at the time of Ibn Taymiyyah are also going to be refuted. That this term, it can't be a bid'ah because it's describing something that already exists. It's not introducing something new. But even if you were to make the argument and claim that this is a bid'ah, I don't care, it was used by the generations that we were told to follow. We were told to follow the companions. We were told to follow the students of the companions and the students of the students of the companions, because these are three noble generations. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ clearly told us are the best of generations. They themselves used this term. So if I can prove to you that Imam al-Bukhari used this term, and I can prove to you that Imam Ahmad and Abdullah Mubarak used this term, then definitely the term cannot be an innovation. Does that make sense? Okay, good. So let's go through some of those who use this term. Okay. So the first example I'll give you is the example of Imam al-Bukhari. Is Imam al-Bukhari a Sunni? Is he a person who's guided? I think Imam al-Bukhari is so guided that even Ahlul Bidah are scared to speak about him, and they claim to hold on to him. So look what Imam al-Bukhari said. In his Sahih, he said, Bab الركوب على الدابة الصعبة والفحول من الخيل. The chapter about riding the camel over the horse. In this chapter, he brings a narration from Rashid ibn Sa'ad معلقا. He said, كان السلف يستحبون الفحول لأنها أجرى وأجسر. The Salaf used to like to ride the male camel for reasons that is mentioned. So he used the term Salaf to describe this group of people. Okay? Now Salaf means those who came before. But who are the Salaf that are being referred to here? Is it the companions? Let's go to none other than Hafid ibn Hajar, who was the best explainer of Sahih Bukhari, to tell us what Salaf means here. He said, A min as-sahabati faman ba'dahum. He said, A, Salaf here means the Sahaba and those who came after them. The Salaf here means the Sahaba and those who came after them. And the same way Sahih Bukhari is accepted by pretty much all of the sects as the most authentic book after the Quran, Ibn Hajar's explanation of Sahih Bukhari is accepted by all those who accept Sahih Bukhari. Because he understood the kitab better than anyone else. Does that make sense? Also, Imam al-Bukhari next used the term in his chapter heading. So now we know Ibn Hajar tells us that when Bukhari brings this term, it means the companions and those who came after the companions, the tabi'in and the atba'u tabi'in. In another place, Imam al-Bukhari used the term. from باب ما كان السلف يدخرون في بيوتهم وأسفارهم من الطعام واللحم وغيره. The chapter about the Salaf, what they used to store in their houses in terms of food on their travels. Okay, what the Salaf used to store in terms of their houses and on their travels in terms of food and meat and other than it. So what was the term that Al-Bukhari used? He used the term Salaf. Now one may say, but Imam al-Bukhari is from the Atba'u Tabi'in. He's from the third generation. Do you have any proof of it being used in the second generation? Yes, I do. Imam al-Zuhri rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, أدركت ناسا من سلف العلماء يمتشطون بها ويدهنون بها ولا يرون بأسا. With regards to a particular mas'ala, he said, I reached the Salaf and they used to do this. Imam Zuhri was the teacher of Imam Malik, and he's from that second generation, from the students of the Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ. Is Imam Zuhri the only one who used this term? Do you see how this is second generation? This term is second generation. Do you see this? It's a second generation term. Does that make sense? Okay, also, is Imam Zuhri the only one from the second generation? No. We have Imam Abdullah ibn Mubarak, as narrated by Imam Muslim in his Muqaddimah, where Abdullah ibn Mubarak, rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, دعوا حديث عمرو بن ثابت فإنه كان يسب السلف. He said, leave off. Ibn Mubarak said, leave off the hadith, the narrations of the man called Amr ibn Thabit. Why? Because he used to insult the Salaf. He used to insult the Salaf. Allahu Akbar. Abdullah ibn Mubarak is from the students of the companions. He's from the Tabi'een. He's from the next generation. Afwan. He might be from the Atba'u Tabi'een. I might be making a mistake there. But he's from the second generation, right? If I'm not mistaken. I'll double check. I think he's from the second generation. But either way, who is he talking about? Salaf is a Sahaba. And also Ibn Hajar has already explained that. Imam Zuhri, when he uses the term Salaf, who's he talking about? Because he was definitely the second generation. So who is the first generation? Who's the generation that came before? It can only be the Sahaba, no one else. There you go. So we find the second generation using that term to describe the first generation. And we have evidence that we're following all three of these generations. Does that make sense? Also Imam al-Awza'i, rahmahullah ta'ala, also from the Salaf. What did he say? He said, Isbir nafsaka ala sunnah. He said, make yourself patient upon the sunnah, follow the sunnah, be patient on the sunnah. Waqif haythu waqaf al-qawm, and stop where the people stop, i.e. the people follow the sunnah. Waqul bima qalu, and say what they said. And again, he's from the Salaf and he's telling you follow the Salaf. Does that make sense? And Ibn Taymiyyah, rahmahullah ta'ala, by the way, he brought ijma'. He brought a unanimous consensus. And consensus is a proof. Because we have, and ijma' is a dalil. And I think we accept that ijma' is a dalil, right? If you don't accept ijma' as a dalil, then you left Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah from the beginning and from the end. But anyway, Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, he brought an ijma'. He said, لا عيب على من أظهر مذهب السلف. There is no deficiency, and there's nothing wrong with a person who follows the methodology of the Salaf. وانتسب إليه, and he attributes himself to it. Okay? He said, بل يجب قبول ذلك منه باتفاق. Rather, it's obligatory to accept it from him by unanimous consensus. So the term Salafiyyah can be used and accepted by ijma'. Does that make sense? And then we have Imam al-Dhahabi, rahmahullah ta'ala, also using it, and he obviously came much after the time of the Salaf, but he came definitely before Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, definitely before 300 years. He was at the time of Ibn Taymiyyah, one of his students. In the Tarjumah, Imam Abu Tahir al-Salafi, he said about him, كان على مذهب السلف. Okay, again, that he was upon the methodology of the Salaf. Also Muhammad ibn Muhammad al-Bahrani, when he was talking about his biography, he said, وَكَانَ دَيِّنًا خَيْرًا سَلَفِيًّا. Again, he said, described him as a Salafi. Also in the biography of Ahmad ibn Ahmad al-Maqdisi, he said, وَكَانَ عَلَى عَقِيدَةِ السَّلَف. He used to be upon the methodology and the creed of the Salaf. He also said that وَصَحَّ عَنِ الدَّارَقُطْنِ, that it's authentically transmitted from Imam Daraqutni, that he said, مَا شَيْء أَبْغَضْ إِلَيْ مِنْ عِلْمِ الْكَلَامِ. There's nothing that is more hatred to me than علم الكلام, philosophy. And then Imam Dhahabi said, قُلْتُ, he said, then, and I say that there is no man that does not enter inside of philosophy and debating and going into these things except بَلْ كَانَ سَلَفِيًّا, except that he's a Salafi. Does that make sense? Also in the biography of Imam Ibn Salah, he said, وَكَانَ سَلَفِيًّا حُسْنُ الْاعْتِقَادِ كَافًا عَنْ تَأْوِيلِ الْمُتَكَلِّمِينَ. He was a Salafi, he had a good aqidah, and he was suffice from the aqidah of the philosophers, mutakallimin, the ones who dived into these things. وقال في ترجمة الفسوي, and also he said in the biography Imam al-Fasawi, he said, ما علمت يعقوب الفسوي إلا سلفيا. He said, I don't know Imam Yaqub al-Fasawi except that he was a Salafi. Does that make sense? Also in the biography of Uthman al-Tabari, he said, فالذي يحتاج إليه الحافظ أن يكون تقيا ذكيا نحويا لغويا ذكيا حييا سلفيا. He said he was what? He was a man he had taqwa, he was intelligent, he was a grammarian, he knew the language, he was zaki, he used to purify his soul. Hayyan, he was shy. Salafiyan, he was Salafi, okay? And also in the biography of Imam al-Zabidi, he said, كان حنيفا سلفيا. He was Hanifan, he was upon Tawheed, he used to follow the Salaf. And also in the a biography of Ibn Habira or Habira عفوا. He said وكان يعرف المذهب والعربية والعروض سلفيا أثريا. He said he was a Salafi. He used to follow the athar of the Salaf al-Salih. And he said also in the biography of Ibn al-Majd وكان ثقة ثبتا ذكيا سلفيا تقيا. Again, he called him a Salafi. Does that make sense? So, like, this is definitely not something new. We have a whole tradition of this term being used again and again and again. Does that make sense? Na'am, inshallah ta'ala. The references, the last ones I gave you from Sirah Alam al-Nubala, Tadhkiratul Huffaz, I mentioned some from there. I mentioned Majmu' al-Fatawa. Imam al-Awza'i's one was Kitab al-Sharia by Imam al-Ajuri rahimahullah ta'ala. He mentions it there. The other one by Abdullah Mubarak was Sahih Muslim, and the one by Imam Zuhri was Fath al-Bari. Then I gave you the references from Sahih Bukhari as well. So that's all the references. And I'll let you know about the kitab as well, inshallah ta'ala. Ibn Taymiyyah Majmu' al-Fatawa.